All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're exploring a highly detailed constitutional proposal that tackles, honestly, one of the most complex geopolitical regions on the entire planet. We're going to be breaking down the Eritrean Afar National Congress, or the EANC's proposed federal framework for Eritrea. This is essentially a blueprint that attempts to reconcile national state interests with indigenous rights, all through a model of shared sovereignty. It's a really structured, comprehensive vision. So grab a notebook, settle in, and let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this by understanding exactly what's at stake geographically. This isn't just any regular coastline. The region known as Dankahalia sits right at the geopolitical epicenter of the Red Sea, right next to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. To put the sheer scale of this into perspective for a second, roughly $1 trillion worth of goods transits through this very artery every single year. That is 12 to 15% of all global trade. This places the indigenous Afar people squarely in the middle of this massive global squeeze between international powers and heavy commercial interests. The deepwater port of Assab is a major strategic asset in all of this. Because of this immense pressure, the question of who actually governs this land and how they govern it is absolutely critical to the stability of the whole region.
So here's our roadmap for today. We are going to explore this proposed framework through a thematic matrix of 6 distinct areas. 1. The Dankula Paradox. 2. Constitutional title. 3. Resources and FPIC. 4. Ports and fisheries. 5. Fiscal governance. And 6. Customary law.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the Dankula Paradox, Indigenous Rights versus Centralization.
To really grasp the proposed constitutional solution, we first have to understand the current situation, as outlined by the source material. If we look at Step 1, we see the introduction of Land Proclamation 58 in 1994. This was a decree stating that all land, water, and natural resources belong exclusively to the state. Then, moving to Steps 2 and 3, this legal framework was essentially weaponized to extinguish pre-existing off-our customary tenure. Basically, overnight, it legally eliminated the communal land rights that had been in place for generations, entirely replacing that traditional stewardship with a centralized state monopoly.
Now, to objectively ground the AFAR's claim to these ancestral lands, the EANC cites an independent legal opinion from Professor Sebastian Gramond. He's a highly respected scholar in Indigenous law who actually later became a judge of the Federal Court of Canada. He found that the AFAR satisfy every major criterion recognized in international law for Indigenous peoples. That includes their historical continuity with their homeland and their distinct customary governance. This independent legal opinion is essentially the objective baseline that the EANC's entire federal vision is built upon.
Moving right along to Section 2, Constitutional Title and Self-Determination.
Now, what's really interesting about this part is how starkly it contrasts two totally different philosophies of governance. On one hand, you have the current 1997 unitary state model, which relies on centralized executive decrees with absolutely zero indigenous recognition. But on the other hand, the EANC vision proposes a decentralized federal democracy. Under this new framework, we see a shift from a top-down delegated authority to a bottom-up compact. It explicitly recognizes the original, inherent provincial title over lands and waters by the indigenous population. That inherent right then forms the basis for delegating overarching powers up to a federal government. It's a complete structural inversion, all aimed at achieving true internal self-determination.
Now, you might be wondering, does this mean breaking the country apart? Actually, no. The proposal specifically advocates for unity through federalism. It does not seek separation whatsoever. Instead, it visualizes a united Eritrea that is reconstructed around its 9 historic provinces. You can clearly identify Dankalia down in the southeast. In this architectural setup, the autonomous state of Dankalia would operate as just one of these 9 provinces. This ensures democratic power sharing between a central government and the regional states.
Let's jump to Section 3, Natural Resources and Mining, the FPIC standard.
This brings us to an incredibly lucrative domain, natural resources. We're talking specifically about the Danakil Potash Basin, which, fun fact, happens to be one of the absolute hottest, most extreme environments on Earth, along with regional gold deposits. The ANC framework proposes that provincial administrations handle the direct administration of these resources, but they have to operate alongside a joint National Strategic Resources Commission. The crucial mechanism tying all this together? It's FPIC. Free, prior, and informed consent.
This is a globally recognized standard ensuring that engagement happens before any concessions are ever granted. It gives indigenous traditional authorities the right to negotiate, modify, or even outright reject projects. It completely transforms the local community from being passive subjects of extraction into active, empowered participants in co-management.
Which leads us to Section 4, Fisheries, Maritime Commerce, and Port Governance.
Shifting our focus over to the maritime domain, you really have to understand that the survival and cultural identity of the Afar are deeply, intrinsically tied to the Red Sea. Here, the EANC proposes a very nuanced cooperative model. Traditional indigenous fisheries and coastal livelihoods would fall under direct provincial management to fiercely protect local food security and cultural practices. But this is carefully balanced with overarching national needs. Things like marine safety, international shipping lanes, and border security, those would be handled cooperatively with federal authorities, establishing a very real, working co-management system for the coastline.
And that leads us directly to a wildly critical piece of coastal infrastructure, the Port of Assab. As we touched on earlier, the geopolitical pressure right here is just immense. To solve this governance puzzle, the ENC's framework makes a vital distinction. It proposes that the city of Assab itself would fall under municipal and provincial jurisdiction, governed completely democratically by the local population. However, the commercial operations of the port itself would be governed by a joint port authority. This authority would be co-administered by federal, provincial, and indigenous leadership. This ensures that national economic interests are met without steamrolling over local sovereignty.
Next is Section 5, Fiscal Governance, Wealth Sharing, Not Isolation.
So the crucial point here is understanding the profound difference between governing a territory and hoarding its economic wealth. A common concern with decentralization is that resource-rich regions will just economically isolate themselves. But under the ENC model, the province holds regional jurisdiction to collect local taxes and resource royalties, yes, but this is deliberately paired with a co-managed National Equalization and Solidarity Fund. So what does that mean? It means that while Donkelia exercises democratic authority over its environment and lands, the economic wealth it generates participates in a nationally agreed fiscal mechanism, a mechanism that benefits all of Eritrea, promoting true nation-building and solidarity.
Okay, our final area, Section 6. Customary law, preserving the Mata system.
This final domain looks closely at the societal fabric of the FR people. True internal self-determination isn't just about arbitrarily drawing provincial lines on a map, right? It is about recognizing how people have actually governed themselves for centuries. The framework calls for the constitutional protection of the Madda'a, that's the traditional Afar customary law, along with the historic sultanate structures. But crucially, and this is key, this indigenous legal framework does not just exist in a vacuum. It is designed to operate concurrently with federal guarantees for minority rights. This ensures that the traditional governance absolutely respects the fundamental human rights of all citizens living within the province.
So, let's step back and see how this all builds into the final overarching vision. By bringing together constitutional title, resource co-management through FPIC, joint port authorities, equitable fiscal sharing, and customary law, it's like a giant puzzle coming together. We arrive at a comprehensive architectural blueprint for a decentralized federal Eritrea. The model strongly suggests that recognizing the unique indigenous status and homeland of the Afar doesn't contradict the goal of national unity at all. In fact, it provides a stable, cooperative structure where local autonomy and federal solidarity actually reinforce each other.
I want to leave you with this really provocative question to think about. When you look at the immense global pressures on the Red Sea and you weigh the historical grievances over centralization, you kind of have to ask, can recognizing indigenous autonomy, rather than trying to suppress it, actually be the ultimate key to achieving both national unity and long-term regional stability? It's a profound question about the very nature of sovereignty and justice, and it's for sure one that will undoubtedly shape the future of the Horn of Africa. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring these crucial global topics.